it's just, I love form. That's what it comes down. I love form. I mean, I've written fiction, I've written screenplays, I've written plays, I've written lyrics to musicals. I'm eclectic. Well, that's actually just a nice way of saying I'm all over the map. But I love form, and I've written adaptation based on specific works, a film, and 2 short stories. And I've written adaptations based on history, taken elements from history and created my own story based on things that actually happened, real events.
That was the voice of professor, playwright, author, and screenwriter Jeffrey Couchman, and it is my absolute delight to have him on as the guest of this episode of the Page and Stage podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jason Cannon. Before diving into my conversation with Jeffrey, a brief Page and Stage plug. This podcast is only one part of my story coaching work. Go check out pageandstage.art. That's pageandstage.art. And there you'll find not just every previous episode of this podcast, but also the archive of my weekly newsletter, which is full of tips, tricks, inspiration, and encouragement for storytellers of all stripes. You can sign up for free and get the newsletter directly into your inbox each Friday, as well as every new podcast right into your inbox every other Monday. Everything is free, but if you find value in all this storytelling content, you can financially support me at pageandstage.art or forward any of the newsletters or podcasts to other story-loving friends, or hire me outright as your personal story coach. So if you're working on a memoir, play, or speech, I cannot wait to hear your story. Now, let me tell you a bit more about my awesome guest, Jeffrey Couchman. This guy is not only a joy to work with in the rehearsal room, he is an insatiable storyteller. Check it out. Jeffrey has taught in various English and film departments for nearly 30 years, including Fordham University, Hunter College, the College of Staten Island, and the HB Studio at the Uta Hagen Acting Institute. He holds a PhD in English and a certificate in film studies from the Graduate School and University Center of the City University of New York. He is a highly sought-after speaker for literary conferences and film festivals, and he has collaborated on screenplays for Imagine Films, Warner Brothers TV, and other studios. Jeffrey has had short stories published in several literary journals, including Chicago Review, Denver Quarterly, and the South Carolina Review. He's written plays, he's written musicals, he's edited annotated editions of the screenplays of James Agee, including The African Queen and The Night of the Hunter. And Jeffrey's book, The Night of the Hunter, A Biography of a Film, was selected by the Financial Times of London as one of its best books of the year. And if the Financial Times of London says it, you know it's got to be true. Here we go with my conversation with Jeffrey Couchman. And I'm here online with the awesome Jeffrey Couchman, a man I am so lucky to know and to have gotten to work with. Right now, the rain that hit me the last couple of days ago, the rain is hitting him. So I'm in Sarasota. He's up in New York. He just had to open his window because the AC was too loud. So he's getting the rain that didn't hit us over the weekend. Jeffrey, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Jason. I love that intro. Yeah, it's been wonderful working with you, Jason. We can talk about one of the shows we did together, Master of the Rebels. We'll get to that a little later.
We'll get there. We will definitely get there.
Together already, so I'm very pleased that you invited me on the show, Jason. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure, Jeffrey. And let's jump right in here. So the first the fun fact, 2 fun facts to open with. Fun fact 1. So you have a PhD in English and a certificate in film studies, right? So I'd love a little quick Jeffrey Couchman nutshell bio of what got you into English, film, and theater. What drew you into this world?
It started long ago when I was a kid. I just loved movies. My dad took me to plays. My mom took me to plays. I loved reading. I just instantly was interested in everything, all forms, from the time I was a kid. And I was writing fiction when I was a kid, and
cool.
Writing poetry in high school. Bad poetry, but at least I tried.
Hey! I once had a book. It was a gift to me from a colleague, and it was the worst poems in the world. It was a collection, and literally it said, and here at the end of this book is what is acknowledged as the worst poem ever written. It wasn't yours. Your name was not on it.
Is that Trees by any chance? Trees? That big...
It wasn't. No, it wasn't Trees. It was. It was like. It was. I know the word plop was in it. That's all I remember.
Yeah, a poem with plop is probably not good unless you're Agda Nash,
Right,
But,
exactly.
yeah. I love movies, especially movies. So film. I thought when I was in high school, I said, "Well, I'm going to be a film director someday." And I went to film school at Southern Illinois University. And when I was there, I realized I really loved literature. So I got hooked up with or met the author John Gardner. He became my mentor, and I realized I really want to just write. And if I'm going to write, I'd rather write screenplays than go direct screen. Directing seemed like a lot of trouble. First of all, you got up at 5 a.m. and have all those people and a lot of trouble. Writing, you're all by yourself. You're alone. I love that, And when I was working on films, I hated the production stuff. It was so awful getting people lined up and doing the photography. But the editing and the writing, I loved that. All alone by myself in a room. That's what I loved. So film was my interest, but in a solo way, sort of. So when I went to get an MA in English, then I went on to get a PhD in film because I thought I would teach college. First of all, I was thinking of teaching high school, but a cousin of mine said, "You don't want to teach high school. Let me tell you why." Laying down the problems of teaching. Fine, I'll teach college. But I was able to get a PhD in English as well. But the Graduate Center at CUNY in New York City had a special program where you could stay on another year or two, it was, I guess, and get a certificate in film. So that's what I did. I pursued both English and film for the PhD. It was a wonderful program there. Morris Dickstein was my mentor there. He was a fantastic critic. He's gone now, but wonderful guy. And so I really enjoyed the program in film and English.
And your expertise in film got you to the point. My fellow cinephiles out there are going to love this. You are actually featured on the Criterion Collection documentary of Night of the Hunter. You got to go to the Criterion Ivory Tower and record. Yeah. So talk about your experience working with the Criterion Collection.
Yeah, they came here, actually, recorded me in the
Oh my God!
It's because
in your house.
Right, exactly. No, my dissertation, part of the reason I went back to get the dissertation was I'd always wanted to write a book about the wonderful film, The Night of the Hunter, Charles Laughton's 1955 adaptation, in fact, of Davis Grubb's 1953 novel, The Night of the Hunter, wonderful novel. And James Agee wrote the script, Laughton directed the film. It's a fantastic movie. And I always wanted to write a book about it. And year after year, I never wrote the book. Finally, said, if I go back to get a PhD, I'll have to write a dissertation.
I'll be forced.
I'll be forced to write the damn thing. So that's exactly what I did. And it's funny, in my orals, when I wrote the dissertation, Morris Dixon and the other people there said, you've actually written a book disguised as a dissertation. You know that, right? That's what I intended to do. And you'll have no trouble getting this thing published. So I got it published by Northwestern University Press. So it's called The Night of the Hunter, a biography of a film. It's a detailed study of The Night of the Hunter. It talks about the novel at first and then the adaptation. And it's a very, very detailed picture of this film. So that was my dissertation. And and then that led me to getting work with the University of Tennessee Press, because they have been editing James Agee's works for a big collection called The Works of James Agee. And they asked me if I would edit his screenplays. So I have already published one volume of The African Queen and The Night of the Hunter, first and final screenplays by James Agee. I have detailed annotations and multiple scripts. Both the first and final drafts of The Night of the Hunter are fascinating to talk. We'll talk about them in a little while here, I hope.
Yeah.
Fascinating to see side by side in that book, the long draft that Agee wrote that then became a very economical screenplay that he and Laughton put together. So it was just a lot of fun to work on Agee. And then that led to folks at Criterion getting in touch with me to say, would you like to be on our DVD? We're doing a making of The Night of the Hunter on the DVD because you've written this book and you've written other stuff. And I said, sure, why not? So I did. So cool. The funny thing is, Preston Neal Jones has written a book about The Night of the Hunter called Heaven and Hell to Play With, a fantastic oral history of the movie. And he told me right at the time I was getting started on my book, he said, the first draft of Night of the Hunter has been discovered. This legendary script had been gone for years. Right after it was finished, it just disappeared. And the estate, I think it was Paul Sprecher, who runs the estate of the James Agee Trust. He was looking in a box, opened it. There was a box. In that box was The Night of the Hunter first draft.
Oh, my God.
Preston told me about this, and I got to work with this for my book. And it had just been discovered. And then later on, I was able to publish the first draft for the very first time in the University of Tennessee publication. So
that's so cool. I picture you like with the white gloves and the tweezers and the green visor.
Oh, it's so true. Holding that for the first time in my hand. Oh, my gosh. This is, it was like gold, It was amazing. And fascinating study and adaptation, as I say, to see what he did with the book, and then to see what he and Lawton together did with the book when they wrote their more condensed version. So
Great.
yeah, AG and Night of the Hunter have been a wonderful path for me.
This is a perfect setup because we could talk about all sorts of things in terms of your career and your expertise, Jeffrey, but this is what I really want to drill down with you for this episode is this focus on adaptation.
Good.
Because
Yeah.
not only are you academically inclined towards adaptation and understand it and can write about it, but you write them yourself.
Yes.
And I think when a lot of people think about adaptation, they don't realize just what a lift that is, just what a fine, difficult art that actually is, because it's not just an adaptation. You are literally transforming something from one format into another. It's almost like alchemy, right? You're taking something that is like, for example, we'll get more deeper into this in a second, but your first adaptation was Battleship Potemkin, which is a silent film, and you turned it into a play with dialogue. So again, what is the hopscotch? What is the calculus? Whatever metaphor you want to use, but because I write a lot of adaptation too, so this is why I'm super excited to have you on, because this is a niche topic we get to kind of dig in together.
Good.
Night of the Hunter is a great starting point. So it was a novel first, turned into a film. You're writing this deep dive study on it. Yeah. What are some of the key things? And follow up question, just to you personally, Jeffrey, what drew you into adaptation at becoming kind of a specialty of yours? Was it Night of the Hunter? Was it something else?
No, I think it's just I love form. That's what it comes down. I love form. I mean, I've written fiction, I've written screenplays, I've written plays, I've written lyrics to musicals. I'm eclectic. Well, that's actually just a nice way of saying I'm all over the map. But I love form, and I've written adaptation based on specific works, a film, and 2 short stories. And I've written adaptations based on history, taken elements from history and created my own story based on things that actually happened, real events. And I've taught courses in adaptation, novel into film and Shakespeare into film. And as you say, I've written articles and the book on adaptation. So yeah, I think it's form. It's because I love form so much that it really excites me to see how a work in one form can be transplanted in another form and grow in its own distinctive way in a new form. I'm interested in different means of storytelling. So I like all these different metaphors: alchemy, transformation, the wonderful phrase of transfiguration we get to in a minute, but transplanting. Either way, I'm just fascinated by that transformation. And by the way, to go back to Potemkin for a moment, it's worse than what you said, because it wasn't just dialogue, it's music. What I wrote was a musical. So, and I think should we start with Potemkin then?
Let's start with that, because that's amazing. So first, talk about what inspired you to, what was the moment when Jeffrey Couchman went, this silent film needs to be a musical on a stage?
Because it was not, I was not the one who said that first. What happened was my wife, who is an agent, Barbara Hoganson, was representing a composer named Eric Alleman. He's a film composer, he's written ballets, and he was orchestrating at the time, and she was representing him as an orchestrator. She brought home some piano music that he'd recorded. Beautiful stuff. I just loved that music. She would bring home tapes from people sometimes, and I'd say, don't go with this guy. This is terrible stuff. It was beautiful. And she came back to me a few weeks later and said, remember that guy whose music you really liked? He has this idea for doing Battleship Potemkin as a sung-through musical. And I said, I want to meet that guy. As something just went off in me, I said, oh my God, I can see it. I can hear it. Of course it should be a musical. Of course it should. So we met, and within about an hour, we'd thrashed out the first act. And he was going back to LA. He called me from the airport with some ideas, So we just hit it off immediately. We're really in sync. And I think it was what you said, though, is what excited me. It's a silent movie. To give those silent people musical voices, that just excited me. I said, that's fantastic. And the film is huge. If people don't know the film, I'll just briefly tell you. It's about events in the failed 1905 Russian Revolution. They tried to topple the Tsar over a year of riots, strikes, and mutinies. And he did not topple. He toppled in 1917, finally. But the failed revolution in 1905 was a huge thing in Russian history. Eisenstein centered on a mutiny on the Battleship Potemkin and a massacre on the Odessa steppes. And that's really the focus of his film. It's a brilliant film. It's really wonderful. But it's huge, And the big events of the film, I immediately realized, could be music. My God, the mutiny is meant for music, and meant for it's the climax of our first act. Eric wrote this frenzied music, and there's so much going on stage. And then in Odessa, they mourn the death of the revolutionary leader, Vakolinchuk, a wonderful scene in the film. And that became a song in our show. It starts out very slowly. Russia is weeping. Our mother, Russia weeps. And it builds and builds to something that becomes an anthem of the whole show. We stand here together with no fear, and our future is radiant and clear, and this magnificent chorus of everybody singing. And then it quiets down again because Eisenstein has this wonderful sequence of boats going out from the shore, taking the men bread and food and drink. And it's just a wonderful little lyrical sequence, beautifully shot. And we turned it into a lyrical number. Bring them our bread, bring them our wine. We'll bring them our bread, we'll bring them our wine. We will make a new world, a world we can call our own. A song about brotherhood and peace and love. And it's very quiet and beautiful chorus of male and female voices playing off one another. And then right after that, the film says, suddenly. And boy, suddenly is right. The soldiers come marching down the steps of Odessa, and the Cossacks come in and they slaughter these people on the steps. And so we went right into another frenzied musical moment. So all these big scenes in cinema work beautifully as big scenes on the stage. And I think as soon as I heard a musical, I think that's what happened. I instantly said, sure, the mutiny, the death on the steps. Oh my God, I could see it. I could hear it. So,
yeah. The scenes kind of just made sense as soon as you kind of, as you said, started thinking of it in a different form. The translation started, right? Well, that's where a song needs to be. Oh, right. There's a character who has to be a narrator. Oh, there's a piece of dialogue right there.
Right. Yes, indeed. And in fact, there is no main character in Potemkin.
Right.
In the film. I mean, there is the revolutionary leader, Vakulinchuk. He's important in the first act, but then he gets killed. He's a main character in our show, of course. But there's no main character. And in the film, there's a young man, very wonderful face. Eisenstein picked these people with incredible faces. He has this naive, innocent little face. And he's in his bunk with his no shirt on. And a bosun comes by and whips him on the back. And the kid bends into the bunk and he cries. And I said, that's our guy. Let's call him Alyosha. Yeah. And let's give him, in fact, a wife and a daughter waiting for him in Odessa. So he doesn't want to join the revolution. There's opposition to Vakulinchuk. Now the two of them can clash. And gradually he realizes he has to mutiny. He has to be pulled into this fight. And he becomes the reluctant hero, the revolutionary hero. So there's an arc for a main character that we can follow through, because a musical needs that. You can't just have the impressionistic scenes that Eisenstein is putting on.
I love that. So because we're talking adaptation, and quick side note, I say it's a silent film, but of course, when you watch it, there is a huge score. I mean, it is.
Yes.
There's an orchestral, massive score underneath this film. Yes. There's already music associated. So in a way, it's not as huge of a leap as I was making it out to be, because the music amplifies the scenes, even though there's no dialogue.
Yeah.
So I think that also is an interesting piece of it.
Yes.
But I love what you just said about, so this is important because adaptation, I think people don't realize sometimes that a lot of conflation happens, a lot of kind of like springboarding happens. In order to honor the DNA of form number one, you have to fundamentally alter it a little bit. Like you just said, we just gave this guy a name. We invented a wife and a child that are not in the film specifically as wife and child. Now, again, you mentioned the Odessa steps. That's the famous scene of the baby stroller like collapsing down the stairs that was then stolen for Untouchables, right?
Right. Down the steps of Union Station. Yes. And before that, Woody Allen used it in Bananas in the Revolution.
That's right. Oh, that's right. I totally forgot that.
And there's a couple others as well. But in fact, as long as you mention that, I will mention, because this is the first thing anybody ever asked me. Oh, you have the baby carriage? And in the first draft, I included the baby carriage. We put it in, we had it there, and eventually we realized, the baby carriage on stage, it's just stupid. It looks like parody.
Yes, I love that, because on the film you can go in slow-mo and the number of the steps, and you can pan and follow in this. But like on stage, how do you put a baby in peril on stairs in a carriage without it, like you said, looking like a Monty Python take on it?
Exactly right. It looked ridiculous. We just said, this is stupid. We can't do it. It's meant for the film. It's perfect for the film. Has nothing to do with the stage adaptation. We can still get the power of that sequence,
right? Because the
theatrical way,
the emotional point of the baby in the carriage going down the steps, right? You can still access that, in a different. I love the word you've thrown out there, Jeffrey. A different form. So we don't have a literal baby in a carriage, but you have an emotional baby in a carriage, whatever that means in your theatrical adaptation.
Right. And in the Odessa step sequence, it's, on the one hand, it's incredibly realistic. I mean, the photography is brilliant, so beautifully. It looks like a documentary, and yet it's very stylized the way he edits it, the cutting back and forth. He goes from close-ups of these incredible people to the wide shots of the feet going down the step. He repeats those feet going down the steps with their guns over and over again. The baby carriage is bouncing down while the soldiers are marching down the steps. we have a woman with a dead child in her arms going up the steps, and then women behind her are going up the steps. So we have this conflicting motion down and up. And this Odessa sequence uses the montage, the famous technique of montage that Eisenstein believed in. He thought for him, montage was a collision of shots. You take one shot, you put another shot against it, and the two of them collide in a way that creates an effect that is bigger than either individual shot. Instead of using Hegelian thesis, antithesis, synthesis, so he has a thesis shot, antithesis shot, they collide and they create and the brilliant example of that is famous Cossack raises his saber and slashes it down, and you see a woman with blood in her face. Those two shots together create this incredible effect that is beyond either one of those two shots. So he has multiple shots like that within this sequence. So it's a stylized sequence in its own way. So we thought, well, we can stylize it in a theatrical way. So we don't even have soldiers on stage. We just hear the footsteps off stage, the pounding of voice, boom, 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 and there's a voice saying, "Soldiers aim, soldiers fire," and then bang, the guns go off, explode, and this comes up over and over again, and just it's unnerving every time you hear soldiers aim. No, and then the guns go off, and the people we've come to know on stage, one by one, are gunned down and they fall and they go into a little area of death, a silhouetted area of death on stage. But we also have the women. There's no steps either. We didn't build Odessa steps when it was on stage. We have a beautiful production at the Hart School directed by Henry Fonte, and no steps. You don't need the steps there. But the women are singing, "Soldiers, don't you see us? Soldiers, don't you hear us?" They're pleading with the soldiers to let them live. So we get that emotional power that Eisenstein has in his film, but we do it on stage in our own stylized theatrical way. That's the adaptation. We're adapting in our own form, but still capturing, as you say, the DNA, the essence of the original.
I often, when I talk to my students about adaptation too, I talk about that each form has its own language.
Yes.
Right. Cinema has a language, right? There are, whether it's from camera angles, the style of acting, the quicker cuts, there's a language that's filmic versus a language that's theatrical versus a language that's musical versus a language that's even TV, right? Not all film is the same. Not all video capture is the same. There's different syntax and vocabulary based on which form you are trying to gift to the audience.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And you cannot recreate the cutting it back and forth from close up to wide shot, the feet on stage. That's cinema. You can't do that in cinema. So you have to do something else. So if you're doing a musical, you need to find ways to transform it into a great ensemble number or a powerful solo, so that the development of this character that I created then becomes a musical development. He starts off with a solo singing, "I just want to get home to my wife and daughter." It's called Safe Harbor. I want to get to Safe Harbor. And it was, I forget my own lyrics. Where are they? Someplace. I am nearing a safe harbor. Soon I'll shelter in safe harbor. No storms there, calm holds there. No harms will touch us there. So Safe Harbor is his solo. And then he and Bakalinchuk have a duet that's very intense partway through Act 1. "Time is running out." On one is saying, "Time is running out. I got to get home. Time is running out. We got to have the mutiny." And they're clashing with one another musically. And that's the key point for him. "I'm not going to join your mutiny. And then the mutiny is his joining. And then in Odessa, he sings to the corpse of Bakalinchuk, "Now I'm with you. You were right, my friend.
Oh, man.
Sorry, I heard it too late. But now I'm with you." What is the whole lyric? There's another place.
Right. This is something. So this is almost like by creating this main character, because like you said, in theater, we sort of need that. We need that place to hang our hat. We need that hero to follow.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas in film, the setting or the cutting, you don't necessarily need. You have a different kind of spectacle that doesn't require the same personal connection that on stage does. So by creating this main character, the entire history, it's almost like refracting what James Cameron did with Titanic, refracting it through Leo and Kate.
Yes,
right.
Yes,
this huge epic background, but we have to anchor it in a really small story in terms of number of people. I mean, to them it was huge. It was love. It was life. It was death. But small in terms of number of people. These two lovers.
Yeah.
They become the focal point, the refraction point, the pivot point, whatever you want to call it, through which Titanic is then viewed.
Yeah.
Right? You did a similar thing here, like creating this main character.
Yes.
We now can take in this huge, like you said, year-long, huge revolution, but through the point of view, it's a Les Mis hack too, right? We see this whole thing through the point of view of the specific characters. Right? We don't try to take on the entire thing, and we can't take it all in at once. We got to look at it.
That's right.
It reminds me of the G.K. Chesterton quote, right? You can put your head into the heavens, but if you put the heavens in your head explodes.
That's great. I love that. I love that. And what you said about Les Mis, that's what Hugo did in the novel. In that case, he did have Jean Valjean as the character that we follow all the way through the novel. They just picked up on that and condensed it and tightened it. But yes, you're absolutely right that we see the events, we feel the events through the individual character. And for Eisenstein, he was interested in not an individual, because as a good Marxist, he was interested in the collective as hero. So it's the masses that are his hero, the sailors,
Yes.
the people in the town. That's the hero. He wanted the collective. He didn't want an individual. He'd probably hate our show.
Probably right. He's like, you've westernized my show.
Even though he was a man of the theater, but I don't think he would have appreciated much what we did to his epic show about the mass, about the masses, about the collective. And he also was not doing a classical narrative with 3 sections, beginning, middle, and end. That's what Aristotle says in the Poetics. So he noticed the tragedies had 3 parts, beginning, middle, and end. And then screenwriting critics like Sid Field and Robert McKee pick up that idea in screenwriting. And there's 3 acts to films, the script. And even now, you go into a film meeting in Hollywood, you talk about the 3 acts to the producers, in a pitch meeting, you have to talk about the 3 acts. But it just goes back to the Poetics. And really, you have fancy terms like setup, resolution, climax. It's just beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
And, I was not interested in that. In fact, he divides it into 5 acts. He has titles, drama on the quarterdeck, the Odessa Steps. He has these 5, sort of a classical 5-act structure. But I was interested in the 3 acts. We have 2 acts in our show as an intermission, but it's really 3 parts. It's really a 3-act show.
Yeah, that word "act" gets a little confusing if you're not inside it.
It does. That's right. But
so great. So Potemkin is an adaptation of a existing work from film to theater. Another adaptation you did that focuses on existing work, you took some Damon Runyon short stories, I think 2 of them, correct?
Yes.
There's 2 short stories that you then adapted into a play called Three Wise Guys. So
right.
Talk a little bit about what that process was like, how adapting short stories, including 2 of them as opposed to just 1, how did you make 2 stories cohesive into 1? What was it like doing short story instead of film? We're still going into theater.
Yeah,
we're still at the end form.
Yes.
But what was that like going from short story literature into play?
Yeah, that was it was difficult making the 2 things work. And by the way, here again, I did not have the original idea. My wonderful wife, once again, I had met Scott Allen Evans, who was he founded and headed up the organization called TAC, the Actors Company Theater in New York. They started in 1992, I think. They closed down in 2018. But I met him a couple times in shows he'd done. And then she said, as with Eric, you met, Scott, that guy you like, that nice guy you met. He said, here's this idea for doing a couple of Damon Runyon Christmas stories as a play. Once again, I want to talk to Scott. And as soon as I heard this, I said, well, of course, Runyon. I think for me, I loved Runyon since my dad gave me a book of his short stories. I was probably 12 or something, and I read his stories and I think for me, wanting to put him on stage was because of Runyon's language. The people talking and they don't use contractions, and the sound of the words. I just want to hear that on stage. You want to hear it spoken. I wrote down here's a line that I thought might be nice for people to hear. This is the narrator talking in one of the stories. The prescription for the rye whiskey comes from old Doc Moggs, who prescribes it for good time Charlie's rheumatism in case Charlie happens to get rheumatism. That's the narrator talking. So we took those words and we put them into a character. So the character Dutchman says, Doc Moggs writes the prescription for me last year for my rheumatism, in case I ever happen to get any rheumatism. Just a slightly different rhythm for the stage and a person talking instead of a narrator. So shaping the language for the characters for the stage was part of the art of what we were working with. But it was that wonderful language that we wanted to work with. And also Scott and I both were intent. And again, one of those meetings that we just instantly clicked and had fun together right away. We knew we wanted to maintain the dark edge of Damon Runyon. Guys and Dolls is my favorite musical. It's a fantastic musical, but it just makes the Runyon characters just sort of lovable scamps. They're lovable.
Yeah.
They are. Our characters are likable, and the characters in Runyon are lovable. But man, there is a dark side. There's a story called Sense of Humor. Well, I can't ruin the ending, but it's got and you should read it, folks. Sense of Humor. It's got an ending that will take your breath away. It's so dark you can't believe it. And there's violence. You never see the violence on stage, but there's undercurrents and violence and darkness, and we wanted to keep that dark edge. And we loved it, especially these are Christmas stories,
especially at Christmas, right?
The dark edge is still there at Christmas. It's Christmas Eve, and there's a guy. In fact, one thing was too dark even for us. There's a scene. It's the stories we used are Dancing Dance Christmas and The Three Wise Guys. And in The Three Wise Guys, there's a scene where the guys are pulled over by a cop. He's going to arrest them, and then he lets them go, and he goes away. And Dutchman says that, let's see if I can get these lines exactly someplace. I thought I wrote it down here someplace. The Dutchman says, and again, this wonderful phrase, if the copper wishes to take us to the jailhouse, I fear he will not be alive at this time. That's a line we took right from the book. And he puts a big gun that Betsy runs into a shoulder holster and puts his gun. We kept that in the show for a long time. All through previews, we had this in the show. And on the night before it opened, we said, we can't do that. We can't hear about a cop getting killed in our show. It just takes the air. Why it took us so long to realize it, I don't know. But we said, he can't talk about killing a cop. And of course, we'd had a prop and the gun and a whole thing to get it all costuming. That had to go because we didn't have. And as soon as they took that line out, the scene played much better. It just flowed and it was funny and it was good, but we couldn't have him talking about killing a cop,
And isn't this interesting too in terms of adaptation, Jeffrey? And we talked about in Potemkin how you added central character and it gave him a family. And here you're talking about we've got to take things out because as we go from form A to form B, they don't translate the same way. That line on the page.
Yes.
And here's the other thing to keep in mind. In a short story, the storyteller relationship is 1-to-1, right?
Right.
It's the page and the one reader.
Yes.
Theater, suddenly, the relationship is to a collective, is to a group.
Yeah.
Right. And the way that plays emotionally, things get amplified in a different way. The way something lands on an individual from a page is going to land on a group in a stage very differently. And that's part of the adapter's job, is to keep taking that self-diagnostic, to keep taking the temperature and go, oh, wait. While still honoring, again, the DNA of Damon Runyon, this doesn't work in a theatrical setting.
Yeah. And you know what? The amplifying is right. It got big. And I think because it was the night before our opening, somehow previews, okay, but thinking about an opening audience, critically, it suddenly changed the line. I heard it in a different way. It was amplified in my ear because I think I was the one who went to Scott and said, Scott, we got to drop this. He said, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely. He just instantly said yes. But I think it was because of that pressure of the opening night that made me hear it differently. And so that's how we get it up. But other things we could keep it. There's some violence on stage, and they have to escape a gangster who clearly wants to kill them, So the dark edge is there for us, but in a way that is not is not miserable for the audience, We also, though, I should mention that we did do some of that adding stuff in the Three Wise Guys, because in Dancing Dance Christmas, it's a story of Dan who's in love with Muriel O'Neill, who is the doll of a gangster named Heine Schmitz. And Muriel is mentioned, Heine Schmitz is mentioned, and her grandmother, Gamma O'Neill, are mentioned, but we needed them as characters. We brought them forward. So
interesting. So they were mentioned in the stories, not even ancillary characters, just they're in the universe, but we never meet them.
That's
but
right.
On stage, we had to meet them at flesh and blood.
That's exactly right. That's right. The narrator can talk about them. He can talk and it fills in little details about them. And Muriel is, Dancing Dan was playing with fire because Muriel is hooked up with Heine Schmitz. But we understand, Chinese dangerous. Okay, Muriel's pretty. Okay, fine. But that's all we needed to know in the short story. That's plenty, But on stage, it's not enough. We have to meet Muriel, So she and Dan have to be a couple, for Pete's sake. And we have to meet Heine Schmitz. He's our villain. He carries all through the show, So because they have to get away from Heine Schmitz. They have to leave town to get away from Heine Schmitz. And then they meet up with him later in the show, So Heine comes forward, Muriel comes forward. Yeah, and we had to expand in that case. And so in Three Wise Guys, we used pretty much the events that are in the story as they were. In Dancing Dance Christmas, it just became a springboard to our fleshing out the story and adding details. And in the story, there's a surprise ending with, I won't give it away completely, but I will say there's a surprise ending with Dan in a Santa suit. Brilliant, hilarious ending. We couldn't use that ending. We didn't use it. But we do have a scene with Dan in a Santa suit and Heine Schmitz coming in. So we used the idea that was at the end of the Runyon story and put it earlier on in our play and played with it, So that's part of it. Look, I can use this element, but not here and not the way he's doing it. I'm going to find some other use for it. But and you mentioned earlier, was that hard to put the two stories together? That was murder for us. We had the two stories, but then we had to stitch them together with a middle section that we wrote all our own. We created our own story. And I have to say, I feel proud of this. Everybody assumed that middle section, this is in a Long Island mansion, was something we took from Runyon. So I guess we channeled Runyon well enough.
Hey.
But that third section, that middle section, was the thing that stitched it all together. What we did take from Three Wise Guys was the car. There's a car that gets the guys are traveling to Pennsylvania to get some loot from a barn from a heist. And that car becomes key to our whole show. We have problems with the men getting a car at the beginning of the show, and then the guys get into the car and get to the Long Island mansion. Then they get in the car and get out of the Long Island mansion, away from Heine Schmitz, to go to the barn. So the car became our spine, So the car.
Cool, right? Yeah, it's like the car is the the recurring image that takes you all the way through.
Yes, yes, exactly right. Right, it became sort of a road film almost. And Scott was
Yeah.
wonderful. He had projections when they get in the car. There would be these wonderful projections of the guys going from New York to Long Island, from Long Island into Pennsylvania, and the music was playing. Just it was really, really wonderfully done. So the rhythm of the car and the movement of the car became the rhythm and the movement of this adaptation. Moving the guys forward to the various spots that they had to get to. And also to make it, we had Runyon's language, certainly. We had the dark undercurrent, certainly. But we also turned it into our own theatrical presentation. Again, we wanted to make it a stage play, right? Not just a recitation of Runyon's dialogue. So we had flashbacks where characters would speak in monologue, so that Blondie Swanson is remembering every Christmas Eve. He reads a letter from a girl who left him on Christmas Eve, Clarabelle. And as he's talking about the letter to Good Time Charlie, we have his lights come up on Clarabelle in the bus on the night she left him 6 years ago, and she recites her letter. And they talk about Gamma O'Neill writing a letter to Santa Claus. And so we go to Gamma O'Neill reciting her letter to Santa Claus. So these little monologues out of time became nice rhythmic touches in the show and made it theatrical.
I was just saying, here's what you gain by doing that. And this is also how you have to kind of tune in to what you're trying to do with the adaptation. So reading a letter from the one who got away, right? The Dear John letter, right? The letter is just a letter. It's a piece of paper. But depending on who's reading it and when, it can sound and feel so many different ways. The person receiving the letter, reading it to themselves, is a very different emotional experience than seeing the girl on the bus writing it. As what is she going through as she writes it becomes your scene ends up focusing on what she is going through as she writes it, as opposed to what he is going through when he reads it. Absolutely. And that little distinction there is such a different emotional flavor. So it's almost like you're spicing your show with a slightly different mixture, a different rub.
Wonderful, Jason. This is why you're a great director, because Scott understood this too. We actually get what you're talking about on stage, because Blondie starts reading the letter. We hear it in his voice, and then he takes it over, and he comes back out of it, and he finishes the letter. So both voices are there, and hers is long, but we get both voices in exactly the way you're talking about right there on stage. Yeah.
And the letter to Santa, right? It's one thing for a parent to read it, an adult to read a letter to Santa. Oh, how cute. And we kind of titter and laugh and, and then to hear a kid, though, read it with complete sincerity.
Yeah.
Dear Santa. Yeah. The letter is completely potent in a different way when the child reads it themselves, as opposed to someone else reading it secondhand.
Yes, exactly right. And that because Gamma O'Neill is an old woman writing to Santa, you can see the kid-like quality in her as she's reading it. So you sort of get the superimposition. The kid is reading it, but the old woman is also reading it, So it makes her all the more touching. Oh, she's just a child. This old woman is just a child, because she really believes in Santa Claus. There's no fake. She actually believes in Santa Claus, which is key to the play. So the voices became important, and also we used silhouettes. Can't quite remember how this idea came up. We were just fooling around. He said, "Wouldn't it be great to do a silhouette? Hey, let's do silhouettes." We had puppetry silhouettes on a sheet, just a sheet beautifully lit. And Andy Gaukel did am I pronouncing his name? Gaukel, and I just know it was Andy. Andy Gaukel, very nice guy and a wonderful artist. He created these puppet shows of two important heists. And in fact, the show opens with a silhouette play, a shadow play. Then that establishes right away, okay, this won't just be Runyon's dialogue. You're going to see a theatrical experience, So we set up this heist in a shadow play. Later, a very important heist is also presented in a shadow play. So that turns his work, Runyon's work, into a truly theatrical experience that is beyond anything you could do on the page,
So far, we've been talking about adaptation, taking one thing that previously existed in one form and transforming it into another, working with a material that already exists.
Yes.
A story form that already exists. But you also work in the world of adapting historical events into stage plays. And this is a whole other modality. It's a whole other way of working, right? Again, adaptation covers so many different things.
Yes.
And so the first one you did was Blood and Fire, correct? And this has to do with the founding of the Salvation Army in Victorian London?
Yes.
Right. So again, was this finally your idea, or did someone else come up? Was it your wife again?
Well, incredibly enough, I guess my whole life is everything Barbara gives me, because she introduced me to a director named Damian Gray, and he commissioned me to write a story about the beginnings of the Salvation Army in 1880s London. And Damian Gray also knew a composer named Lisa Hefter, and he brought her in on the project. She was a classically trained composer. She played the viola in quartets and symphony and played the Carnegie Hall. But she loves musical theater. So she was a terrific, another sung through musical. Potemkin was sung through. This also was a sung through musical. I guess that was my idea. He didn't care whether it was book musical or not, but I love the sung through form. And so I said, let's do this because again, the huge events of the Salvation Army and the drama that went on at sea, it seemed perfect for a sort of operatic form.
Right. So you don't have a film to go back to. You don't have a Potemkin to go put into your DVD player and watch and take notes. So
No, exactly.
what is your workflow here, Jeffrey? How do you ingest Victorian London and the founding of this worldwide organization? Now, what was your process like, and how did the story you wanted to tell? Because this story could be told any number of ways,
Yes,
right?
exactly right.
Any number of ways.
Any number of ways. And this is different from we're going to talk about another adaptation from history called Master of the Rebels, and that's based on an actual event that happened. This is different from all the other adaptations. That there was no story that I was working from. I had to create a story based on historical information. So I started by reading lots and lots of stuff about the Salvation Army, and learned as soon as I read things that were going on. I said, "Oh, that's a number. That's a musical. That's a song. Oh, this is going to be great." I read Booth's book In Darkest England and the Way Out, which is a fascinating book. It's a preview of our social welfare state. He writes about things that we need for the poor in this book: financial aid for the poor, homes for the homeless. I mean, I said, "Listen, it's an incredible book to read." And so just reading about what happened with the Salvation Army and the drama of it all made me realize this is a show, because the Salvation Army was founded as an army. They have ranks, they have uniforms, they have bands, music, and they have a banner and a flag, and their motto is blood and fire. That's the name of our show, right? So that became a song too. The lyrics sound the call forward to free the world with blood and fire. Heed the call, helping to save the world with blood and fire. So just taking their motto and turning it into a song was the first thing I think I did. Actually, that's the first song I came up with. And that blood and fire, by the way, he's not talking about violence and destruction. That's the blood of Christ and the fire of salvation, sanctifying fires.
Yeah.
So the Salvation Army. Well, I should back up. General William Booth created the Salvation Army. 1865, William Booth created, actually then it was called the East London Christian Mission, eventually became the Salvation Army. But he's a Methodist preacher, and he started this organization, and he used popular tunes to draw people in. They would preach on the street, but he'd use popular ditties of the day to get people to listen to him. He even said, apparently, "Why should the devil have all the good tunes?" And I said, because Booth becomes a character in our show. He's larger than life. He's this revolutionary figure ahead of his time. Of course, he's got to be on our stage. Booth has to be there marching across the stage. And we gave him a song. "Why should the devil have all the good tunes? I will wrestle him any day for a song. Music is the wind in the sails of the ship of the Lord."
Great. So really quick, because this is really interesting in terms of process, Jeffrey, is that you've mentioned two key songs, and they came from something specific. Blood and Fire, from the slogan on the flag. "Why should the devil get all the good tunes?" A direct quote.
Yes.
It reminds me of in Hamilton, right? There's that great line, "The world was large enough for both Hamilton and me," right? That's that thing that Aaron Burr, that was a line that Lin-Manuel Miranda took from an actual letter or journal that Aaron Burr wrote. It's a literal thing that Aaron Burr wrote.
Yeah.
The world was large enough for Hamilton. And so to weave that into a lyric, right? Like what you're just doing here, I just want to point out that this is one of the things in terms of historical adaptation that can be, it's a nice little cheat code for anyone out there wanting to do a historical adaptation. Look for those sticky bumper sticker quotes. Absolutely. Or those banner slogans, because those can turn into your chapter titles, into your song titles. Those become catchphrases for your characters. Absolutely. It's a great way to really dial into the historical setting as to what were they saying and how. And it sounds like that's exactly what you did.
Exactly. I mean, I would look, why should I can't write a line that great. That's the guess I created. But I can write a song based on it. That I can do. So just as a springboard. Yeah. And I would have characters would talk about what Booth said in his work. And an aristocratic father tells his son he advocates free legal counsel for the poor. He's outraged. And the son says, "Yeah, shocking to think a poor man might get justice, right, Dad?" And Booth himself tells this that son, Michael is his name. He says, let's get people fed first, and then we'll worry about their souls. That's actually something he said in so many words. So we
What
have
a great line.
Yeah,
Man, that's a good line.
get people fed first, then we'll worry about their souls. So and this character, so all these little bits and pieces. But go back to the song stuff though, because I said, well, of course, the Salvation Army is providing us with our musical. He would come on stage,
Totally.
these little ditties, and Lisa wrote a wonderful little verse. So when Booth first comes on stage, it's a big number. Booth is coming, Booth is coming, Booth is coming, and he finally marches on with the Salvation Army band, and they're coming on, and they're singing about Greta. Where was my Greta? I got my own Greta lyrics here. Greta was a girl who lived in sin, but Satan ran out when she let God in. Everybody's singing and put your faith in Jesus. And then the other people, Greta was a girl who lived in sin, but Satan ran out when she let God in. Everybody's singing, put your faith in Jesus. And the people that are opposed to Booth are singing right back in the same music. Greta was a girl who had no luck. She fell down the well when she tried to. Everybody's dancing. Kick your heels for Greta. And so the whole scene is the Christian lyrics and the body lyrics. And they're fighting back and forth with a battle of the bands, essentially, a battle of the voices. And that also is history, because in opposition to Booth, and you can imagine brothel owners and pub owners and various people hated Booth and what he was doing. And there were gradually over time developed skeleton armies, they called it. We'll have our own army. They became skeleton armies, and they would disrupt the street missions with bawdy lyrics and songs and doing the kind of stuff we're doing on stage. We're presenting on stage what actually happened. But they also threw rocks and they attacked these people. It was violent. So we have a violent scene on stage. But it developed over time, the skeleton armies. But for this show, we have a villain named Lyle, and we see him get the idea on stage. Wait a minute, they have an army. We need an army. They have a song. We can have a song. We see the skeleton armies being born right there on stage. So that's the thing in history. It take over time, all this stuff happened. Let's just do it one morning. It all happened on. We just
exactly that's another powerful cheat code for doing historical adaptation. And this goes back to Shakespeare, right? Is that you conflate characters. You conflate events, you tighten timelines, right? So that, because again, what we're trying to access, it's not a documentary. It's not trying to pretend to be a historical document. It is an interpretation. It is an emotional interpretation of an historical event. So of course we want to see this side, even though that idea of the skeleton army probably manifested in a much messier way over a much longer period. It works dramatically for it to be contained in a 3-minute song through a character's point of view. We still get, it's still, and this is where it can get really sticky, Jeffrey, it's still true.
Yes.
Even if it's not the literal truth.
It's true, but not the truth. Yes. Or maybe it's true. It's the truth, but not true. However you want to say it.
Exactly.
But yes, and then that allowed us to have a climax for our Act 1, where the Salvation Army comes in singing Blood and Fire, and the Skeleton Army is singing their songs. So again, a really huge. So that little bit we saw earlier on becomes even bigger as a battle of the bands for the end of Act 1. So yeah, so it's exactly right. You condense. You mentioned Shakespeare. My favorite manipulation of Shakespeare is one of the world's great adapters, wasn't he? I mean, I think he only wrote 2 original plays, but Midsummer Night's Dream and The Tempest, I think there was only 2 original works.
Only 2, yeah.
Well, Othello is this unbelievably melodramatic tale that he turns into high drama, and he takes 2 stories for King Lear, an old play about King Lear, and a prose work, Arcadia, with Sir Philip Sidney. He takes these 2 works and puts them together to create his 2 plots. And his original play, King Lear, ended with a happy ending. King Lear, guys.
Yeah, I know.
No, that ain't going to happen. We're going to kill this guy.
The day before opening, Jeffrey, he goes to his co-writer and says, I don't think this is working.
Very fast ready. Anyway, but my favorite manipulation it comes from Shakespeare. In Henry IV, Part 1, in reality, Prince Hal was 17 years old, I believe, and Hotspur, Henry Percy, the son of the rebel who was going against Henry IV, he was 39. Shakespeare made him the same age. He wanted 2 guys that were the same age because he wanted conflicting emblems of youth. And that gives Henry IV a chance to say, my son is, because Hal off being wild and crazy in the taverns with Falstaff, and he said, my son is stained with riot and dishonor, are the words he used. And the other son is Harry is honorable and loyal, and maybe they were switched by a night-tripping fairy, he says, in birth. So he can compare the 2 kids. And then we see Hal and Hotspur singly in combat at their own battle, and Hal kills Hotspur, and Hotspur says, "Oh, Harry, thou hast robbed me of my youth." One of the great dying lines of all time. Oh, Harry,
I got to say it with blood dribbling out of my chin. Yep, I got to play Hotspur.
You, that's wonderful. he can have that line only because Shakespeare made him the same age,
Yep.
So history
Yep.
doesn't matter. What matters is the drama, the working of the drama. You're not there to. And it's the first question people ask me always: what was true and what wasn't? In Master of the Rebels, especially the play we're going to talk about, people say, "What? I can't even remember what's real and what's in the play. It all blurs together after a while,
Right.
because your work becomes your own version of it." So yeah.
I really want to quick before we get to Master of the Rebels, because this is the one that it's how you and I kind of met and got to work together.
Mhm.
So 2 little side points first. One, you're writing lyrics. So this is another version of adaptation because you're not just putting it into dialogue.
Yeah.
You're not just putting it into a piece of theater. You also now within that adaptation, you are also now adapting that character's emotional whatever into a song.
Yeah.
So in terms of what works in you differently, Jeffrey, when you're writing dialogue or outlining a plot structure versus when you're writing a song? Like, what are the goals in you as a writer? What are you trying to access in those different modalities of storytelling?
I would say fundamentally, you just hit the key word. Fundamentally, there is not a difference because for me, it's always telling a story. Whether I'm writing lyrics or giving dialogue, I am telling a story, especially in a song. I want to, there's a song in Safe Harbor, that song I mentioned, but then we have a story. He has a wife and a daughter. Oh, he loves them and he had a wonderful life together. And he wants to get home to them. That's the story. Okay. And so very often I try to find a song that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, but a beginning, a middle, and end is specific to that person at that moment. What story is that person trying to tell? And how can I tell that story in small form in lyrics? So I think that's really the what I'm always looking for. In fact, I got a job translating a German musical into English. I don't speak German, so they gave
Interesting.
they gave me a literal translation of the lyrics, and then I had to translate them to fit the syllables to the music. It was a musical I was translating. But what the composer, whose name I won't mention, he wrote terrible lyrics, and he didn't tell any stories. That was the problem. They were just all over the place. He just threw, oh, that's a funny line. That's a cute line. I'll use those words. It was just a mishmash. But every song had a brilliant core. Every song had something to say, so I could shape the words to tell a story. And that translation job was the best job I ever had in learning and realizing, oh, that's what a song is, a story. It's as simple as that. And I can tell it couldn't, but I can.
Very cool. And then side note number 2, because we were talking about how Booth had this great line. Why does the devil get all the great lyrics, or all the great tunes?
Yeah.
So there is a place. I actually wrote a play for a company called Histrionics, and their mission was they built their plays out of found documents. So every word in the play had to exist somewhere. And I wasn't even so much a playwright as a curator, right?
Yeah.
So I'm writing this play about J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and their friendship.
Yeah.
So I can't invent anything. I can only pull from the letters they wrote, the books they wrote, the journals they kept, the notes from their speeches, Lord of the Rings, Chronicles of Narnia, other academic books about them. The other Inklings who also wrote. And so it was more like I had to take in this huge amount of data and spit out, here's the 2 hours traffic, but every word was actually written, recorded, spoken, written about them in another, because this theater company was based in the Missouri History Museum.
Oh my God.
So that was the mission. It was about bringing history to life, but much more focused on the history than the artistic interpretation version.
That's incredible.
So
I think that sounds much more challenging than
it was really hard.
Drawing on history, creating your own words for the people, sort of being a ventriloquist. But you had to actually follow that. That's deadly. That's really, I admire you, Jason. Good work.
I directed a play a few years ago called Kunstler by Jeffrey Sweet, who's another fantastic playwright who does a lot of stuff with historical adaptation.
Uh-huh.
And so this is based on Bill Kunstler, the activist lawyer. And at one point I asked Jeffrey, because the actor was killing it, the play was so good. I asked him, how much of this is actual stuff that Kunstler said or wrote? And he's like, maybe 10%. I was like, really? I couldn't believe it, because it was so alive. It sounded so consistently like Kunstler. And Jeffrey, he was like, look, I read everything. I ingested everything. But I'm writing a play adapting this history, and I'm not based in a history museum, basically, right? I'm truly adapting. And so once I got his voice in my head, I was able to write as him. And I'm wondering if that's part of what you did with Blood and Fire and also coming up Master of the Revels, do you kind of find the character inside you and then sort of channel them, or how much dialogue in Blood and Fire was actual historically recorded? How much did you invent?
No, most of it was invented. There were a couple of lines from Booth here and there. They talked about his ideas, but exactly what you just said. I mean, reading his book and understanding hearing his voice. He wrote very well. Hearing his voice, I could. Well, that's Booth. I can have him talk. I know how to talk. How Booth talks. I am Booth. I guess that's what it is. You don't just hear it. You become the character. I mean, writing is partly acting. Unfortunately, I have to do it on stage, but I become the characters. I actually am living as Booth and I'm speaking as Booth. In fact, he in the story, Captain Amelia, the woman, falls in love with an atheist named Michael, and the two of them end up going off together. And I'll talk about. I'm going to come back to that, the overall message of the show in a minute. But Booth, as much as he loved humanity and all people, he understood there was one way to salvation, and you can't marry him because he doesn't believe, and you can't stay in the army if you marry a non-believer. So he has a song, "Only One Road to Paradise." There is only one road to paradise. All other roads lead you to misery, wretchedness, far from the comforts of grace. So Booth would say this. This is what he believed. Even I don't believe it. I could give these lyrics to Booth because he believed it so intensely. And once I was writing it, I believed it intensely too. And I think it's what I was saying about Damon Runyon. Scott and I created our own middle section in Runyon's voice because we lived inside that voice so closely. We could find the ways to get those words out. That plot, though, the atheist and the salvationist going off together. Well, they go off one way on stage, and Booth and his crew go off the other way. So the message of the show ultimately is that the secular and the religious path, they're different paths to the same end, a life of love and compassion. And I'm thinking, just as Eisenstein would hate Potemkin because it takes away his Marxist underpinnings, I don't think Booth would care much for this show that says,
no way.
They're equal. No, they're not. Only one road to paradise. So, but the overall show he might not like. But nevertheless, I didn't distort Booth because I gave him those words about only one road leads you to paradise. And that's so, yeah. But I was, playing with using the salvationist ideas for my own ideas, but channeling Booth enough that I could create his words and his voice. So yeah, I think you have to live inside the character. I used to tell my screenwriting students that, this someone wrote says this sounds like you. I know your voice because I've read some of your stuff. You're not the character. Be the character. It's like the quote, be the ball. But be the character. Live inside that person at that moment. And if he's a villain, believe the villain doesn't think he's a villain. The villain is living his life as he should live it, and that people should know that I'm right. So you have to believe that this villainous attitude is not a villainous attitude. You are the villain, and you are the character who thinks this way in life. That's what it is. You are a character who believes in what you're doing, even if what you're doing is killing people.
Jeffrey, before we get to Master of the Revels, which again is the show you and I got to work on together, you were just talking about becoming the character. I just wanted to tag on to that for writers out there. I'm just in my fiction class last week, my short story class with my students. This is something we talked about, that a big trap for early writers is that all the characters sound the same, and they all sound like the writer. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I know a little exercise I always give my writing students is to cast their story 3 times.
Oh, that's good.
Once with like famous actors, stage, screen, TV, whatever. Just cast it. You have a multi-million-dollar budget. You can get whoever you want. Cast it with famous actors.
I love it.
Then I say cast it with people from history, like historical figures. And you could even call that maybe celebrities, right?
Yeah.
And then third, cast it with people from your life. Your aunt, your uncle, your family, your friends, people you know closely. And once you've cast each character those 3 different ways, you to your point about collage earlier, right? Montage, you sort of have your arms now around how you're visualizing that character and how they talk. Like I mentioned my wonderful, brilliant Aunt Vondria, and I was like, I could write as her. I know her well enough. I understand her energy and her humor and her generosity and her particular way well enough. And also my uncle, her husband, Randy. He is one of the smartest yet driest people you will ever meet. I could write a scene with the 2 of them and they would sound completely different only because I'm sort of channeling what I know about them.
Right.
That's to your point, Jeffrey. I didn't create it out of nowhere, right? I think that's the trap writers fall into, is I have to create these characters out of whole cloth.
Yes.
No. Whether you're adapting, there's always going to be something you can pull from. And if there's not, then pull from famous people, pull from famous actors, and pull especially from your own life, because that will give you a voice to at least start from,
Exactly. Yes.
so that
yes.
your characters don't all just sound like you.
Yeah, right. Yes, I always tell my experience students something similar. How does your aunt talk? How does Aunt Dahlia talk? Put her in here. Start there and see. You guys change it, but you get her in there and don't get away from you. And of course, what you're saying is what a lot of screenwriters do. I mean, Robert Towne knew he wanted Nicholson as J.J. Gittes in Chinatown, so he's writing in the voice of Jack Nicholson. All the lines are being spoken as Jack Nicholson would say them, and you write differently if you're writing for a particular voice. And people have written scripts on specs saying, I'm writing this as for Dustin Hoffman, so I'm going to make it. And then they luckily sometimes sell it, and Dustin Hoffman plays it. Sometimes they don't, but but writing with a voice in mind is very, very helpful, And it's
Shakespeare did that. This is our pivot. Shakespeare knew his core cast. They were a troupe, right? So he always knew. He knew who his ingenue was. He knew who his leading man was. He knew who his clown was, and he would write for them.
He would write for them. In fact, in the first folio, and I have a facsimile of the first folio, every now and then he would slip, and he wouldn't write the character name. He would write Keene. He would write the name of the actor.
The actor's name.
The actor's name. And I brought a page from the folio to it just blew my Shakespeare students away. They said, "Oh my God!" And suddenly he becomes so real when they realize, he was actually writing this for people he knew in a theater. Suddenly he's not just the bard. He's just a guy writing stuff for his friends, and he couldn't get them out of his head, so he put their names on the page.
That's so amazing.
Yeah,
Shakespeare is a real human. Go figure.
Go figure.
Speaking of which, this is what you're playing.
Master of the Rebels, yes.
Master of the Rebels, which was a commission during COVID at Florida Studio Theater when I was still there. This was a commission that landed in your lap. And this is a play. I got to work with you on this play and then direct a workshop of it. And again, you are adapting from a historical event. And I think this one was fully your idea.
Yes, it was. Absolutely. Finally, my wife didn't have anything to do with this, guys. My wonderful dad, once again, is involved. He gave me a run, and he gave me a book called Shakespeare's Lives by S. Schönbaum. Brilliant scholar, wonderfully written book. And I got to the chapter on this kid named William Henry Ireland. He's 19 years old, 1790s London. He's forging Shakespeare documents and fooling people right and left. They actually believed that these documents were by Shakespeare because it was an age of bardolatry where they were just craving where are the letters? Where's his autobiography? What is all this stuff? They wanted to believe in Shakespeare documents so much that they believed in these things which had terrible spelling. They were absolutely absurd, but they believed in them. And he was doing these things because he wanted his father's love, because his father thought he was a dolt. Samuel Ireland, the father, thought William Henry Ireland was an idiot. And so he thought, well, I'll give my father what he really craves. He desperately wants Shakespeare stuff. I'll give him, and then someday he'll love me. And when I tell him that I've written this stuff, he'll think I'm a genius. But when the son actually confesses to the father still, you're not smart enough to have done this. You're too dumb. To his dying day, Samuel Ireland believed that the documents this kid forged were real. So I love the idea. I'm reading this stuff in Schönbaum's book, and sort of as with Potemkin and Blood and Fire, I was seeing it happen on the stage. I was watching the characters jump from Schönbaum's page onto the stage, And I said, this is a scene, that's a scene. But again, big events become scenes. I guess that's important for me. I've said this now a couple of times. I'm realizing the operation. See, there's a big event that can be put on stage. That's a big event. But and I didn't think of film. I immediately thought of stage, I suppose, because it's Shakespeare's world, The stage has to be a theatrical world, And William Henry Ireland was a very theatrical kid, and he had a friend named Montague Talbot who was in the theater. So everything was theatrical. It worked perfectly for the stage. And in fact, there's a wonderful scholar named Edmund Malone attacked the forgeries in a 400-page book or something. It was incredible. I've read the whole pamphlet, and it's a brilliant attack. He's sarcastic, he's witty, has a wonderful voice. And as I'm reading this stuff, I'm seeing this character on stage talking directly to the audience. He's tearing the book down right to the audience. And I said, he'll be surrounded by Samuel's friends, and one by one they'll leave the stage, and Samuel is left alone with Malone. I was seeing the scene that I eventually wrote as I'm reading about Malone's attack on William Henry Ireland. So, big events easily transferred to the stage in this.
And that's what's interesting too. That this is, I think, really interesting is thinking imagistically and trusting your instincts here. So again, as you're reading the scholarly work, suddenly an image is manifesting in your theatrical imagination, right?
Yes.
And you are in that scene. Again, how long did it take Malone to read through all the forgeries and then write his drafts and then publish it? That's months.
Right, absolutely.
And it's condensed into a couple minutes.
Yeah.
And then this theatrical metaphorical gesture of his friends falling away one by one as they are convinced of the argument. Again, that's not quote unquote realistic, but it's emotionally true. It is emotionally exactly what happened to these people.
Yes.
And that's the power of the theatrical gesture, right? Is you can access
Yeah.
huge emotions in a very contained amount of space. And that's what you're doing. You're taking these academic works and adapting them into these theatrical gestures.
Yes, absolutely. And the phrase you just hit on is absolutely important for all of us. I mean, anyone doing an adaptation all the way across. Emotionally true. That's what you're after. Whatever details you change, whatever you condense, whatever you fiddle around with, it's the emotional truth you're after, whether it's Runyon or Eisenstein or the history of William Henry Ireland and his father. The emotional truth is what's important. How you get there, it's your business as the creator to do that theatrically.
I think this is so important, Jeffrey, because I know there's also been stuff in the news about, especially it's hitting more stand-up comedy right now about what is true and what is not.
Yeah.
What you're allowed to say and how I think when I talk to my writers, when they ask me about publishing or about genre, I always tell them, look, it's marketing.
Yeah.
What promise are you making your reader or audience? And in our case here, Jeffrey, with Master of the Revels, we would market it. It's a play. It is based on true events.
Yes.
We are not marketing this as the true telling of or historical or documentary. If anything, one of the goals, I think, of a play like Master of the Revels is that people in the audience would be so taken by what you've put them through that they'll go seek out the same books that inspired you to write the play and learn the true history for themselves, right?
Yeah. I've often done that I said, well, I want to read the book that it's based on now. And then you say, oh, they changed this, they changed that. Well, in my play, I have a dramatic scene with the father and son. They have a confrontation. The son tears out of the house and never sees his father again, storms out at that moment. That's the breaking point. That never happened. He didn't leave the father's house, but he slipped away secretly. The dad didn't even know he'd left at first, So that's not dramatic. We can't have that. But the drama on stage, it's still the truth of them separating and going different ways. But you have to do it in a dramatic way on stage. So that's and so that was a matter of creating something. Sometimes I had to simplify and condense. That's an important thing. When you're simplifying and condensing. William Henry Ireland had two sisters. One was actually living in the house when he was doing the forgeries. Her name was Jane. I at first tried to work her in. I put the sister into the.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
I never even knew he had sisters. You never brought them up in rehearsal.
She just muddied the waters, and she was kind of. I kicked her out of the family along with the other sisters. She didn't belong there. She was too messy. And get this, I don't think I ever told you this either. William Henry Ireland got married eventually, and according to one biographer, married twice. He got married, and the wife was one too many characters, and she was just going to really clutter the landscape because we got to keep the focus on the father and the son. That's my drama, the father and son. The wife doesn't figure into it for my purposes. So sorry, you never got married, Will.
But to that point, and this is again what's so fun about this: someone else could read the exact same documents you did, Jeffrey, and they might want to tell the story of him and his wife as opposed to him and his dad.
Oh, absolutely.
And it would be the same historical events, but told through a different emotional prism and for a different purpose.
Yes.
Right?
Because there were actually interesting things with his wife and stuff.
Sure.
No, interesting stories. Yeah, I know. And sometimes stuff happens and you really want to include it. There was a very complicated moment where William Henry Ireland was almost discovered. He'd written a document with the signature of John Hemmings, one of Shakespeare's friends, one of the guys who put the first folio together. And a real John Hemmings document turned up, and the signature looked nothing like Will's. And he ran off and he forged the signature and made it look much closer to the original. He came back. I'm sorry, there was confusion. There was another John Hemmings. He worked for the Curtain, not the Globe, and I got the wrong documents here. So, and they believed him. They bought it. But it was a wonderful incident. I just couldn't fit it into the play, But it's one of those things that you love seeing, but you can't. But it interfered with the flow, because that's the thing. You're looking for a flow, a dramatic flow. The pacing is important. That just makes me think of something. It's a beginning, middle, and end we've been talking about. Something makes me think of something Mike Nichols once said. I don't know if you know this, but you're going to love this. I remember some interview he did. He talked about his days in improv. And he said he learned about structure in improv because he realized it's just every sketch is a beginning, a middle, and end. First of all, you have the premise and you lay it out and you play with it a little bit. That's the beginning. But you can't just do that endlessly. You got to have a twist or a complication, something to move it to the middle. You need something now. Oh, it's developed. It's going farther. He said, and then you can tell partly because the audience is maybe getting tired of it and you're getting tired of it. You need to move toward the ending, find a way to move into something that's going to finish it off, So he said, those days in improv held me in good stead when I wrote and directed years later. Everything went back to those early days of understanding beginning, middle, and end from working at it through on the stage. Isn't that fascinating?
That's great.
And I think that's that's important for an adaptation. So how to make take all this mess, as you say, things are very messy in history, especially how to take it all and just condense it, simplify it, make it 1, 2, 3, beginning, middle, and end.
Right, because history doesn't have an end. right? It's what we're doing as adapters. It's almost arbitrary, right? But we're deciding I'm going to end this piece of this story in 1982 instead of 1985, and I'm choosing that based on any number of factors. But yet, history doesn't have an end built in. So, in terms of the story we're trying to adapt, we have to kind of decide. It's kind of like Star Wars, right? Is it 1 movie, 3, 6, or 9? Like, what's the actual story? Whose story is it, and what story are we telling? And it changes with each new movie release, right?
And even it's interesting you say, even when someone dies, oh, that's the ending. But no, a death in history isn't the end. It's often just the beginning. Long live the king. The king is dead. Long live the king. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's the end is a beginning.
Speaking of which, we're gonna move into our quick wrap here. This has been so much fun, Jeffrey. I always just have so much fun talking with you.
I have a blast too. It's so much fun. It's so great. This is wonderful. It's just
all our fellow geeks and nerds out there are gonna love this episode.
I'm glad. Well, to all you geeks and nerds, have fun. Enjoy yourself. Go write your adaptations.
So I love to always wrap up with a couple pieces of advice and a spotlight. So advice number 1, what is the best advice that you have ever taken?
About writing, you mean?
And it can be, this is kind of dealer's choice. Anything. Writing, life.
Laugh.
Oh,
laugh.
That's good.
Laugh. Don't take yourself seriously. Just laugh at yourself and laugh at things that could drive you crazy. Find a way to laugh at them. And I got that partly from my father, who had a wonderful sense of humor. I got it partly from just watching the Marx Brothers. They were my gods in high school, the Marx Brothers, just learning to shrug stuff off with a laugh and finding a way to move forward. And laughter is a ventilation, a salvation. And so, being able to laugh at yourself and laugh at the world around you. Yeah, it doesn't mean you don't take things seriously. It doesn't mean you can't grieve or mourn, but it's just there has to be times when you just shrug it off with a laugh and move forward.
Yeah. It's that wonderful difference between taking the work seriously but not taking yourself seriously.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Yeah.
So what is the worst advice that you have ever given? Again, writing, life, whatever.
The worst advice I ever gave? That is an interesting question. I've probably given a lot of bad advice in my life. Jason, that's an interesting question. I don't think I can't think of anything. I'm sorry, I'm stumped.
Because there's just too many.
I mean, I'm trying to think if I gave a student bad advice of our daughter.
I know I have.
Well, I guess a friend of mine was attached to somebody that I thought she's just trouble. I think, I don't know, but suggesting that he stay away from her was a bad mistake. Fortunately, it didn't hurt our friendship. You don't know what you're talking about. Just shut up. I was okay. But that was terrible because they ended up having a lovely relationship. So, and I came to like the woman very, very much. So I guess, telling somebody to stay away from, but I don't, can you believe I did that? I guess I am ashamed of myself that I did that. I told her, stay away from her. She's no good. That's a terrible thing to tell somebody. So I'm embarrassed to have to admit that's the worst thing I ever did. Told somebody to stay away, and bad advice.
But hey, at least you can be honest.
I'm sort of laughing as I say it because I laugh.
Exactly. We've tied it together.
I guess if the guy had, knifed me, I wouldn't be laughing maybe, but it all ended up well. All's well that ends well. So.
Absolutely. Shake the bard. So now it's a spotlight for you, Jeffrey. So anyone listening who wants to learn more about you or read your books or how do they get in touch with you? Like, where can we learn more about Jeffrey Couchman? Where should we go to find you?
Or
what do you have coming up too? Like what things do you have dropping coming up?
Oh, well, I am finishing up another volume of James Agee's screenplays. In this volume, he adapted 2 Stephen Crane short stories, The Blue Hotel and The Bride Comes to Yellow Sky. And then he, again, from both working from history and from sources, the sources for Stephen Crane, he adapted history for 5 episodes in the life of Abraham Lincoln, 5 half-hour episodes in the 1950s for the wonderful television series Omnibus. The early life of Lincoln ends when he leaves New Salem. So adapting, as I say, sources and history, and that's called Mr. Lincoln. So this new volume will be The Blue Hotel, Bride Comes to Yellow Sky, and the Mr. Lincoln scripts. Mr. Lincoln scripts are published for the very first time. The first draft of Night of the Hunter was published for the very first time in the University of Tennessee Press volume. Mr. Lincoln's scripts will be published for the very first time in this new University of Tennessee Press volume. I hope to deliver the manuscript this fall. So that's what's coming up. Another lot more detailed notes and various drafts and variant scripts. The Mr. Lincoln stuff is fascinating for his variants. He wrote long sequences that wouldn't work for a half-hour episode, but he knew that and he cut them down very nicely. But I get to print the long sequence. He had Lincoln in the Black Hawk War, some funny stuff. But it couldn't get on the screen, but it's there in the script on the page now for people to look at. So the variant texts of his various scripts are really fascinating to read. So that's coming up. And then after that, I'm finally going to get back to revising a novel that I had started a long time ago and finished and then want to rework it. So that's what I'm going to get back to.
Oh, Fiction. Well, let me know when that's ready, Jeffrey.
Days. So, but yeah, the books, I mean, you can go to Amazon and find, I think in the bio I sent you maybe if you want to put it on your screen there sometime, I think the Night of the Hunter is available on Amazon. The annotated screenplays, the African Queen Night of the Hunter is available on Amazon. You can also go straight to the websites of Northwestern University Press for my book, Night of the Hunter, or to the website of the University of Tennessee Press. But, the Three Wise Guys, though, I should mention this. That was published, that Broadway Publishing Company.
Oh, great.
Guys, that's at BroadwayPlayPublishing.com, BroadwayPlayPublishing.com. And Scott and I adapted our adaptation for a radio drama. I know. I think we should have talked about that. I forgot about that. It's on Hear Play Audio Theater. You can hear it. You can go to hearplayAudiotheater.com and look at Three Wise Guys. Listen to Three Wise Guys there. And, we had to do things for the adaptation, stuff like, the guy pulls, that's a nice looking gun you got there,
Right, exactly.
And to actually put lines like that in. So it was wonderful to go back into the old days of radio and see how they created radio dramas, because Three Wise Guys, I mean, it works beautifully. The language of Runyon works beautifully just as an audio, we didn't have our shadow plays or any of that stuff. It's now strictly an oral experience, AURAL. So yeah, Hear Play Audio Theater is a fun place to go listen to Three Wise Guys. Yeah, especially at Christmas time, so I guess that's enough.
Fantastic. No, I'll put all of that stuff, of course, in the show notes, direct links. And Jeffrey, oh my goodness, thank you so much for your time and sharing your enthusiasm and your laughter and your insights. I'm just so grateful.
Well, thank you, Jason. You're so much fun to talk to. You always have wonderful things to add and things that get me thinking. You sent me some notes about adaptation that got me thinking as we had before we were on this podcast. So thank you for your wonderful work, Jason. I love working with you.
The Page and Stage podcast is built with Alitu, the all-in-one podcasting app created by the amazing team over at thepodcasthost.com. You can learn more about all my guests and access their websites and projects in the episode summaries. If you enjoyed and found value in this podcast, please tell at least one other person. Word of mouth has always been and will always be the best marketing tool in the world. Thank you for listening, and until next time, I'm Jason Cannon, and I cannot wait to hear your story.